There's one thing you hear a lot in connection with Peter Criss. It's the idea that he wasn't such a great drummer. You can get this opinion from people that were in his band, such as Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, both of who are on the record for saying that Peter Criss couldn't keep basic time. He didn't understand elementary song structure. They basically had to train him like a dog to do everything that he did on the classic Kiss albums. So what are we to make of all of this negative criticism directed toward Peter Criss? Is it true? Is he really not a very good drummer? Well, let's go back and start from the very beginning. On the first Kiss album, which is well known for being subpar in regard to its production. In fact, Kiss talks often about how long it took them to find a suitable producer, and it's widely acknowledged that it wasn't until the Destroyer album that they finally found a producer in Bob Ezrin who knew how to handle the band in the studio. This isn't my point in the video, but what I want to say is if the band and many other critics observed that the production on the first few albums wasn't the high point of those albums, then we can't attribute whatever Peter Criss did or didn't do on those albums. His performances were not greatly enhanced by the producers or by this. We're getting the band basically in their most garage sound, at their most raw and unfiltered incarnation. So starting off with the lead track of Strutter. One of the most distinctive things about it is not only the drum beat at the opening, but the pace of the timekeeping. Peter Criss has like a shake-along timekeeping thing. He speeds up a little bit ahead of the beat, and it gives Kiss an interesting texture that is not present in a lot of bluesy hard rock bands of their nature. All right, let's move on to Nothing to Lose. It's got that signature cowbell sound in it. It's got the hell on the bell. Without that cowbell, the song is only about 50% as effective. Firehouse, another distinctive drum pattern. Cold Gin, more highly distinctive drumming. Now you can argue, well, they made a point of letting each band member's personality shine through on each songs because they were trying to be like the Beatles. Okay, fine, but Peter Criss is doing it. He's up to the job. The studio performances are here. You can't attribute it to the production method. All right, let's move on to Hotter Than Hell. On Hotter Than Hell, you've got a song in Let Me Go Rock and Roll that is quite demanding from a drumming point of view, particularly if you were to look up a live clip of this song at the time. Now, what impresses me is not just the studio performance of Peter Criss on Let Me Go Rock and Roll, but these live clips in question. If you look at them, he's right there. It's a really complicated song. It's a very demanding song from a drum point of view. There's a lot of fills and there's breaks, and if he couldn't keep time and he doesn't know elementary structure for a song, I don't think that it would be possible for him to play so well live. Now let's jump to the song Strange Ways, which has a very heavy sound, like Black Sabbath sound to it, and it's a swampy feel to it. And Peter Criss's drumming on this is just next level. It is the perfect sound to match the riff. It brings the song to life. It gives it a depth and even a kind of a mystery that it might not have without with him playing on the low end of the kit but playing ahead of the beat. It gives it a really interesting sound. Okay, so Dressed to Kill, which would be an album that's notorious for having weak production on it by Neil Bogart, who was apparently wasted out of his mind on weed and booze while he was doing the mixing. Well, anyway, think about just a couple of songs on here. Rock and Roll All Night has an infectious beat to it that helps drive the song and make its anthem come alive. She has kind of a draggy drum pattern again, but he's got that thunderous feel to go under it. And for a song like Rock Bottom, that jazzy going ahead of the beat drum beat is playing almost against the downtrodden lyric, and it makes a really interesting dynamic. This is part of what I'm saying about his drum, the character of his drumming. Alright, the next album, of course, is Destroyer, and it's here where I would argue that you get your best representation of Peter Criss as a studio drummer. largely due to Bob Ezrin's immaculate production. Detroit Rock City has an incredible drum beat on it and fantastic flashy drum breaks on it. King of the Nighttime World is another excellent drum pattern that makes full use of the kit, shows the full tonal range of Peter Criss's capacities, as well as serving the song in a really good way. Do You Love Me has an infectious, memorable signature drum beat to it, even though it's pretty simple. And of course, God of Thunder has that again with that heavy bottom end of the kit. So the three observations I would make about Peter Criss as a drummer overall is, one, he does make full use of his drum kit. He is one of those drummers, is a jazz oriented drummer who sees the tonal range of everything at his disposal, and it's not so much about his technique as it is about his understanding of the different voices that he has to make use of in order to accentuate the signature parts of each of the songs, because Kiss is built around having like a theme for each song, and his drum beats are built around that theme. He does a very good job of that, and part of that is by understanding the all-around tone capacities of his drum kit. Two, his innate capacity to play at the head of the beat. Usually a rock drummer either plays slightly behind or slightly ahead, or in some cases, like with Phil Rudd, they can do either one based on the needs of the song. Well, Peter Criss is one of those drummers that almost always plays ahead of the beat, but in his case, it's a virtue, and it makes Kiss an interesting band, because imagine Kiss with a laggy drum. Well, when they had Eric Carr in the band, you have that. You have playing behind the beat. And what happens there is that party energy, that infectiousness of Kiss, it just kind of sucks right on out, and they become John. My third observation about his drumming is that he was excellent at coming up with riffy drum parts that people could relate to and could remember. So Peter Criss does a drum solo, the crowd could be more into it than, say, Neil Peart's 50 times as technically accomplished as Peter Criss, but you might be bored by his intricate playing, whereas Peter Criss plays just like a tribal beat that everyone can go along with, so he's a real crowd pleaser. So if you take all the elements that we've just discussed, I would say, yeah, you can't say he's a bad drummer. You can say that he fit perfectly within his role in Kiss in the 1970s. So I don't think he's a bad drummer at all. I think that what he is he's a very limited drummer. He could play his role in Kiss, but he might not have fit in another band. My final analysis is that Peter Criss probably didn't continue to develop as a drummer, and that he probably hit his peak pretty early on, but that no, he is not a bad drummer. And I think it's take all of that into consideration when you're hearing people say that Peter Criss was this terrible drummer, and remember that for what he did within the role of the band, he was an excellent drummer. This is what I think. If you have a different idea, please feel free to express yourself in the comment section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.